In the past of a people who were in a lot of trouble, when tribal alliances could no longer protect them from outside threats, something strange started to grow. However, it wasn't a war or an invasion that marked the turning point. Instead, it was a request that seemed almost like betrayal. People in Israel had been led by God since the time of the desert, but now they wanted to be like other countries. But what could make a group of people want to give up divine direction in favor of human leadership? Did the need for a king just mean being afraid of dangerous people? Or was it a sign of a greater problem that was going on in the country's soul? Indeed, there was a real fear of the Philistines, but there was also a strong desire for power, for something that could be seen, for a person in armor who hung a sword. That made it clear to everyone that Israel wanted a throne, no matter what it took. It was a time of change when this request came back. Israel had been led by judges and prophets up to that point, but they were going through a rough patch. Tribes had been working together as a union for hundreds of years, thanks to family ties and customs. Each group had its own head, and times of unity almost always happened when there was war. In this setting, people like Deborah, who called Barak to war, and Gideon, who led a small army against the Midianites, came into the picture. Short-term men and women that God sent to restore order and protect the faith. But the judges' time was coming to an end. The scene was a mess. There was fear and distrust because the tribes were not stable and the Philistines were always making threats. The lines were weak, which made people feel even more vulnerable. Things started to fall apart around faith, which should have been the basis of everything. The search for a king then picked up speed, not on a whim, but because people were scared they might not make it. In 1 Samuel 8:8, the leaders of the people went to find Samuel. The prophet was the last link to that old order. He was already tired, and his sons were not respecting his role. They didn't ask for help or spiritual direction. They needed a king. They needed someone to fight for them, lead their forces, and show them who was in charge. It wasn't just a political matter, it was a change in the way the country saw itself. They didn't want to be different. They wanted to be like all the other countries in the area. Samuel was hit. It wasn't just a request to make things different, it was a turn down. God knew this because he told Samuel, "They have rejected me, not you, so I should not rule over them." 1 Samuel 8:7. Still, the Lord let it happen, but he made it clear through Samuel that what they chose would have results. A king would tax the people, take boys to serve in the army and girls to work in his palaces, and force Israel to live in a way that was very different from what they were used to. There would be order under a king, yes, but they would have to obey a man without question and no longer trust the Lord completely. It was the start of a new phase with mental tasks that were much more difficult than taking out enemies. In the middle of all these hopes and fears, Saul shows up. He comes into the story looking for lost donkeys without any pretenses or claims of being noble. A small thing that would be funny if it weren't for the divine irony. A future king who was on a normal journey and had no idea what was in store for him. Saul was from the tribe of Benjamin and was the shortest of the 12. However, his height and good looks made him stand out. At first glance, he looked great. He was tall, strong, and pretty. He got to the throne, though, not because he was tall. God made that choice. When Samuel saw Saul, God told him, "This is the man I told you about. This is the one who will lead my people." There was nothing fancy about their meeting, but it was full of endless meaning. As one cycle came to an end, a new one began. This new cycle would affect the lives of kings, prophets, and even the prophetic family. Israel's kingdom didn't start with crowns or parties. Instead, it was marked by lost donkeys, a prophet in sadness, and a people struggling to figure out who they were. Still, there was the first king. God chose him, the people asked for him, and he was meant to carry the weight of a whole country. Before we go on, I'd like to offer a welcome to you. This story might move you in some way. Please like it and subscribe to our channel. Getting these words to more people helps our faith grow and gives us direction when things aren't clear. Also, feel free to say in the comments, I choose to trust God, even though I don't understand everything. We need to show that there are still people who want to do what the Lord wants, even when things are hard. Also, please leave a super thank you if you want to help this job. We can keep telling more Bible stories and spreading this message of faith and hope thanks to your gift. Thank you so much for your help. We'll keep going on our journey today. Being made king was more than just the start of Saul's rule. In a symbolic and important way, it stood for the place where the holy and the human met. In 1 Samuel 10, it is written that Samuel poured oil on the head of that young Benjaminite. This action had a lot of spiritual weight. The oil, which was a visual sign of God's blessing, not only proved his rightfulness to the people, but it also sealed a calling from heaven. God picked him, even if it was because people cried out for him. It was clear during that somber ceremony that this was not just a political event. He would be filled with the Spirit of the Lord, which gave him power, wisdom, and authority. A king was born at a time when the country was in trouble. But the most dangerous tests would come with the throne. These tests would not be of war, but of the heart. At first, it was clear that God's Spirit was in Saul. Even people who knew him were surprised by what he said as a prophet. People started to see him as someone special, someone who had been picked. The chance of dropping, though, goes up with the height. The same Saul who was humble when he was called and hid among the bags because he didn't think he was good enough would start to lose himself in the crown's reflection. As his rule went on, problems within the country became more important than threats from outside. The kingdom was useful for keeping Israel organized, but it also made it possible for people's wants and the rules of heaven to clash. In the Bible, there was a thin line between king and prophet. Saul started to count less and less on Samuel, and by extension, on God. A few years later, there was a clear spiritual plan that made this distance stand out the most. The Lord told everyone to get rid of the Amalekites, who had a history of being bad. This sentence was very old and was a spiritual punishment for those who had fought Israel in the desert without being brave. In 1 Samuel 15:3, the command was clear: kill everyone and everything, including children, animals, and men. There was going to be nothing left. But Saul was not sure. In other words, he decided to read the law in a different way. His army won the fight, but he chose to spare Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and even kept the best sheep. From our point of view, it might have looked like planning. God saw it as complete rebellion. That would be the start of the end of his rule. Samuel saw the group and heard the animals when he got there. He addressed the king because he was angry. To defend himself, Saul said that he had saved the animals so that he could give them as an offering to the Lord. With a strong voice and a sad heart, the prophet spoke one of the most powerful verses in the Bible. To obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed is better than ram fat. 1 Samuel 15:22. It wasn't just a military or political mistake for Saul to turn away from God's will. It was a breach of spirit. God, who had made him king, now didn't want him to be king. Samuel was very sad, and he never saw Saul again. After that, the Lord's Spirit would leave the king, and a young shepherd from Bethlehem's heart would start to be drawn to him. Still, Saul would rule for a very long time, but his power had already been taken away. The weight of being rejected by God would slowly kill him. He would always be tormented by anger, fear, and mental pain. He started out humble and anointed, but now he was going in the wrong direction and hurting himself. The main message of Saul's story is to be careful. This picture shows how arrogance, pride, and disrespect can hurt people who have been called by God. The throne, which was supposed to be a sign of safety and fairness, turned into a place where people fought with each other and made hasty choices. So, the first king of Israel started to lose both God's favor and power over himself. Saul tried to use offerings as an excuse for not following the rules, but it didn't work with Samuel or the Lord. In 1 Samuel 15:9, we read that he saved Agag, the king of the Amalekites, and kept the best of the flock because he said they would be burned as a gift. But Saul's mind was already on something else. He didn't want to please God. He just wanted to look good in front of the people. When Samuel talked to him about it, he made it clear that what he did was not a small mistake. It was a clear refusal of God's plan. In order to explain himself, Saul tried to play down how bad what he had done was, but the truth is that he was trying to protect his power and reputation behind his religious words. He wanted to look like he was following orders without actually doing so. That sealed his fate. The words from the prophet hit like a sword. Without thinking, Samuel said, "The Lord has turned away from you, and he no longer sees you as king over Israel." 1 Samuel 15:26. Those words not only took away his right to be with God, but they also left a spiritual hole that he could never fill. It was no longer a path of pride for Saul after that. It was a path of failure. His leadership, which had been based on spiritual inspiration before, turned into one based on fear, looks, and instability. He lost heaven's favor, but he didn't give up the throne. He still ruled, but there was no longer any good in it. He kept giving orders, but there was no longer any direction. After spiritual loss came something even worse. The Bible says in 1 Samuel 16:14 that the Spirit of the Lord left Saul and was replaced by an evil spirit that hurt him. That wasn't the only thing that was wrong. It was a breakdown of the soul, a deep emptiness that caused pain, chaos, and an unbalance. His mind started to get worse, and his fear changed into hatred. It is in this state of ruin that David shows up. God picked this young shepherd, son of Jesse, to be the new king in secret. While Saul tried to keep his crown by force, God had already chosen someone else to lead who would have a heart open to his will. David walked into the scene out of the blue. He had been called to the palace to play his harp and calm Saul down. His singing talent temporarily calmed down the king, who was having a hard time. People were interested in more than just his songs, though. It would be even more amazing for David to beat the giant Philistine fighter Goliath, who was a threat to Israel's army. David went into war with faith and courage when everyone else, including Saul, was frozen with fear. He won. People quickly heard of him. The people were very excited when he came back from beating Goliath. People sang in 1 Samuel 18:7, "Saul killed his thousands, but David killed his 10,000s." Saul thought the song was painful to hear. Because he was too proud and scared, he started to see David as an enemy instead of a friend. This comparison set off a passion that would take over Saul's life. The things that the people liked about David changed into danger in the king's eyes. It became scary. After that, Saul started to treat David badly and tried to kill him more than once, and failed. His mind, which was already weak, fell apart into fear, hatred, and rage. He used to be too proud to fully follow God, but now his pride showed up as blind jealousy. Even though God had already said that Saul would be changed, he couldn't stand the thought of it. He tried very hard to hold on to a throne that truly did not belong to him anymore. So the king who was supposed to lead Israel to success became a prisoner of his own fear. Saul's story kept going downhill with hasty choices and inward pain that never went away. At the same time, David didn't want to take anything away from the people or the God who was quietly getting him ready. Instead, he grew in grace before them and God. Because Saul wouldn't accept God's plan, it ate away at him like an open wound that would never heal. Even though he knew that God had picked David, he couldn't accept that. The chair, which was given to him as a gift of good luck, turned into an idol that he couldn't give up. David and Saul were no longer just competing in politics or battle. It turned into a spiritual fight, an open defiance of the Lord's will. Saul went down darker and darker roads because of this inner fight, which was caused by hurt pride and the fear of being forgotten. His behavior started to show that he was desperate, like someone who had lost their way but still wanted to be in charge of their own life. At first, he admired and even liked David, but over time, their relationship slowly fell apart until it turned into obsession and hate. Saul saw himself in David, a man after God's own heart, how he had changed. His pride, which kept him from fully following, also kept him from turning away from his sins. Not only did Saul's failure to accept God's correction seal his fate, but it also showed how power can change even the most called people. God's rejection of Saul wasn't an arbitrary punishment. It was the only way to deal with his determination to walk by himself. He had everything that could have been a gift, but his choices destroyed him. His story became a living tragedy. And as he became more aware of being turned down, his hopelessness grew. He could no longer hear God. The dreams stopped. The prophets stopped talking, not with Urim, not in dreams, not in words. Heaven was quiet. That quiet was stronger than any enemy sword. So when the Philistines came back for another fight, Saul was on the battlefield without any spiritual help. In the face of war, he felt naked. What Samuel had helped him solve before was now empty. It became very unstable for God when he stopped answering. Out of pain, Saul did what no one could have imagined. In 1 Samuel 28:7-8, he tells them to find him a psychic. That is, someone who could answer him like God no longer did. The king who had kicked the seers out of the land before now went looking for one of them behind closed doors. He went to Endor with a mask on, which is a town that people who still follow the rules can't see. In that place, he found a woman who did necromancy, which is against the Torah. When Saul asked her to call up the spirit of Samuel, he broke any ties of loyalty that were still there. It wasn't just a sign of weakness. It showed that he had lost his faith. He did it even though he knew he shouldn't. He knew it went against everything God had taught him, but he wouldn't give up. God's voice had already told him everything, so he was ready to listen to any other sound. The medium was shocked by what she saw, but she knew that the man in the mask was Saul. She did what she was told, even though she was scared. The spirit that showed up said things that made the king's heart freeze, and no one knew if it was really Samuel or just a trick God let him play. There was no hope. Instead, the message was clear. Saul and his boys would die, and someone else would take the throne. This trip to the medium of Endor is the darkest picture of Saul's fall. He was once chosen, spoke like a prophet, and led wars. Now he was looking for comfort among the dead. His spirit was so far from the Lord that he could not tell the difference between right and wrong or between holy and common things. As if to warn of a disaster, it was like an echo. His failure story has been used as a warning for hundreds of years. It shows that turning away from God doesn't happen all at once, but over time through choices that make the heart hard. Saul didn't fall all at once. Little by little, he went away until there was no light left. It was too late to turn back once he chose to listen to whispers that were telling him not to. The choice Saul made to use Endor as a mediator was not only bad judgment, it was also against God's orders. In Deuteronomy 18:10-12, the law made it clear that any action related to witchcraft, fortune-telling, or calling on the dead was wrong in the eyes of the Lord. People didn't just believe these things because they were beliefs. They broke the promise that God made with his people. Israel was only supposed to get advice from God. Any attempt to get advice from someone else was seen as spiritual betrayal. When Saul crossed that line, he showed how weak he was as a leader and how hopeless he was when he no longer felt God's presence. He didn't make this choice because he wanted to fight, but because he felt deeply abandoned. But neither fear nor pain are good reasons to break eternal rules. A long time ago, the Lord crowned the King of Israel. Now he walked around in the dark, looking for answers where there were only lies. It's a hard truth that this choice shows us that when we turn away from God's voice, we might listen to any other voice, even ones that are further from the truth. In Saul's case, divine silence didn't make him want to change. It made him try to control the supernatural. He chose to look for spiritual shortcuts instead of breaking down in front of God. He went right into the pit by taking those shortcuts. There was a lot of fear in the medium when she saw Samuel for the first time. It's possible that she had never seen anything so real before. Saul, on the other hand, was dressed up, But the woman knew right away who he was because the reveal was so strong. She did what was asked of her, even though she was scared. After that, Israel went through one of the worst times in its history. Samuel, who has already died, shows up in front of the man who broke with God. There is a lot of spiritual stress in the scene in 1 Samuel 28:16-19. There is no comfort or peace from the teacher. His being there is not a gift. It is a sentence. He didn't come to answer questions. Instead, he came to repeat the judgment that had already been made. Then why do you ask me, since the Lord has turned against you and is now your enemy? With this question, Samuel shows how bad Saul's fall really was. God had not only stopped talking, he was now against him. He had worked very hard to hold onto the throne, but it was no longer spiritually his. It was his turn to be judged, and his fate was set. Samuel tells Saul that he was rejected the day he didn't follow God's order to kill the Amalekites. That's when things started to go wrong. The Lord has done this to you today because you did not listen to his voice. 1 Samuel 28:18. These words hit Saul like a stone and made him feel heavy. God saw him as no longer king. He would also lose his throne to people the next day. The end surprise is terrible. Samuel tells Israel that the Philistines will take them over and that Saul and his sons will die in battle. There was nothing else to do. There was no way to go back. The last word from the prophet wasn't about saving, it was about punishment. Saul started his trip with a blessing, but at the end, he would be condemned. Saul falls to the ground when he hears this, not having any strength, hope, or direction. He used to be in charge of troops and was praised by the people. Now he was on his knees in front of a medium, listening to a dead figure tell him that his time was up. Along the way, they had been proud, disobedient, and always unwilling to do what God wanted. One of the saddest parts of the history of the kings of Israel ends with this scene. Not because they were about to lose the war, but because a man who decided to keep his power rather than give up his heart was falling apart spiritually. And as Saul stood in the dark, facing the sentence that had already been made public, he realized that being close to God is more valuable than any throne. Samuel's words were like a harsh mirror that was held up to Saul's mind. In 1 Samuel 28:18, the prophet made it clear that Saul's rejection by God was not an accident, but a direct result of his continued disobedience. He didn't listen to God's directions, believed his own judgment, and most importantly, he broke his promise to the Lord. Now that he didn't have any spiritual power or direction and was about to go to war, all that was left for him to do was look at the sad mirror of his choices. The horrible things that were said about him did not just happen to him. Saul's defiance would cast a shade over his children and the whole country. Samuel told everyone that Saul and his children would die on the battlefield. After that sentence, there would be no more continuity on the throne of Israel. This was the end of a time that started with blessing and ended with pain. People forget about this, but this scene shows it. A spiritual leader's choices have an effect on everything around him, not just his own life. No longer was Saul's fall personal, it was national. Once a sign of unity and success, the king was now a sign of loss and being far away from God. But this text also brings up a deep question. How could Samuel, who was already dead, show up at that time? Ezekiel 12:7 in the Bible says that the body turns back into dust and the spirit goes back to God, who gave it. This suggests that there is a natural end to life and that the soul will return to the Creator. What did really happen in Endor that dark night? It's not easy to say. In the Bible story, this appearance is described as something very special. Samuel's appearance doesn't mean that he came back to life in a full way. Instead, it means that God intervened just once for a very specific reason, to punish a king who had totally turned away from God's will. Over the years, many experts and philosophers have talked about this event. A common understanding is that God, being in charge, let that vision happen in a special way. This wasn't because of the medium's illegal activity, but as an exception to the rule so that he could give the final sentence. The idea that no power on earth or in heaven can control the dead without the Lord's permission supports this point of view. There, the woman from Endor was really scared by what she saw, even though she was probably used to tricks or illusions. She had no power over it. What she saw wasn't a ghost she made up or a shadow that witchcraft had produced. It was a real presence that was allowed by heaven so that Saul's sentence could be made clear. John Calvin, who was one of the most important leaders in church history, wrote that Samuel's appearance might have been a trick from Satan, but that God had allowed it. Not in a way that supports necromancy, but to show how serious Saul's attitude is. Even though his servant disobeyed him, God was still the total ruler of events, even when things didn't go as planned. From this point of view, it's clear that God is still in charge, even when people do bad things. Even when people make bad choices, he can still use them to do what is right. And in this case, judgment came through an appearance that didn't praise necromancy, but showed how bad it is when God turns people down. So, the story of Saul's fall is more than just a personal tragedy. It becomes a warning that will never end about how dangerous it is to close your heart, ignore signs of change, and look for answers in ways that aren't true. Saul didn't get there overnight. He kept making small changes and giving in until he could no longer recognize the sound of God's words. And when heaven can't be heard, the soul holds to any sound, no matter where it comes from. What happened to Saul in Endor shows that there was more than one departure. It showed a man who was broken inside and suffocating under the weight of his own decisions. He was completely alone, even though there were troops and authorities all around him. This man made it clear that he wasn't looking for God's will when he talked to the medium. He just wanted to get away from his fear. A lot of modern experts see this story as a metaphor for how many people give up on the ways of the Most High in times of trouble and try to solve their problems on their own. The scene is not only old, but it's also global. When God is silent, a man who is desperate often runs in the wrong direction, looking for signs, comfort, or control. People often want to take the easy way out, and Saul's behavior shows this. This is especially true when the soul feels trapped. The trouble wasn't just talking to the medium, it was also what she stood for. A heart that didn't believe in God's promises anymore. God had made up his mind, and it was final. Saul would be changed. His rule was coming to an end, and someone else would take over. The king didn't want to accept this truth and give up his power in a humble way. Instead, he chose to hold on to what little power he still had, even if it meant breaking all the rules. Samuel did not bring hope when he showed up that dark night. Being with him did not fix, guide, or lighten the load. It was a stern and final warning that he gave. God had cut Saul off from him. Before, the chair was a sign of honor. Now it would be a sign of punishment. David was getting ready already. The prophet also said that Saul and his sons would soon die. This wasn't just a guess, it was a sentence. There was nothing else to talk about. Samuel's words didn't leave any room for comfort. There was no turning back. It brought the truth of the end with it. The effect of these words was felt right away. Saul was so scared that he fell to the ground. His strength let him down. He used to be too proud to see his mistakes, but now his pride is weak enough to hold him up. He had lost everything. Even though he was still alive, he was no longer in charge. Even though he was still king in name, heaven had already shut its doors on him. A man's life went from having a calling to ending with a split, and this scene shows the lowest point. He was killed not by his enemies or by fights in other countries, but by his failure to trust, follow, and give up. Each choice that went against God's will caused unseen wounds to appear until there was only hopelessness left. So Saul went back to camp. He had heard from Samuel that this would be his last fight, even if it had been a ghost. The king was getting ready to fight the Philistines, but he didn't have any faith, strength, or direction. The stress was rising, the forces were setting up their bases, the fight was getting closer. But the most important fight would not be fought on the ground. It had already happened in Saul's heart. Israel didn't know it, but the end of an age was about to happen. People thought the king was still on the throne, but God had taken him down a long time ago. The promise made to David was coming true, but it was being kept quiet. Even though Saul had troops around him, the biggest threat he faced was himself, because he was separated from God. The story hints at something much bigger than a single event. This verse tells us that life away from God's will is dangerous, even if everything looks fine on the outside. The real reason Saul failed was not that he lost the war, but that he put his fears ahead of the God who had called him. That day, the sun rose full of signs. When the forces met on the field, you could almost feel the anxiety. A heavy heart and a beaten soul made Saul the leader of a split people and a weak army. This wasn't just another fight, it was the end of a long trip. When the Philistines moved forward, Israel's defenses quickly broke down. Soldiers ran away, warriors gave up, the front line gave up, and there was only the king who was trapped. Saul looked around and saw that the end was near. He was hurt, surrounded, and had no other choice. It would not be the enemy's sword, though, that would kill him. He was afraid of the shame of being caught alive and shown off, made fun of, or even abused as a war prize. Seeing how bad things were, he asked his squire to kill him. The young man thought about it. Even though his death was certain, he couldn't kill the man who was still king. When they said no, Saul did the impossible. He fell on his own sword. Samuel's statement from the night before came true with that last action. That was the only place he was when he died. He did not do it out of honor, but out of sorrow. His dead kids were lying around him. Jonathan, his favorite son, and the one who had always been loyal and brave, had also fallen. The dream of a continuing lineage and the promise of continuity were no longer there. King David's throne was empty. God's silence could now also be seen in the lack of guidance. Saul's death was more than just the end of a king. It was the result of years of making choices that were against God's will. People were blessed and hopeful at the start of his rule, but he lost it because of pride, rebellion, and futile attempts to control things that were out of his control. It was a sad event in Israel's past when he fell, but the end wasn't quite there yet. When the Philistines found Saul's body in the field, they were cruel. They cut off his head and put his body armor on show in the shrines of their gods. His body was hung on a wall in Beth-shean, not as a military threat, but as a display of how awful he was in public. This wasn't just a loss for Israel, it hurt the pride of the country. Some people did remember who he was, though. The people of Jabesh-Gilead remembered how brave Saul had been when he freed them many years before. It was one of his first acts as king. Because they respected and were brave, they went through enemy country to get Saul and his sons' bodies. They got them back and buried them properly. It was a last act of respect for a king who had been picked by God, even though he was going to fail. At the same time, chaos was spreading to other parts of Israel. When the king and his children died, there was no one in charge. Tribes were split up. Some people still held on to the house of Saul, looking for a continuation that didn't exist anymore. Others were hopeful about David, the young fighter who had been chosen by Samuel a long time ago and was now seen as the best person to lead the country. David would soon be the center of attention, even though he wasn't at the fight. People liked him, troops looked up to him, and most of all, he was someone who kept his promise to God. Because he won, was humble, and stayed true, he was the hope of a new start. He didn't want to take the throne by force, though. He would wait until the Lord said it was time. When Saul died, the end of a hard and troubled chapter came. The country was shook. The Philistines controlled even more land. Vines and groups could all hear the pain of loss. But in the midst of the chaos, a seed of rebirth was placed. Its name was David. When Saul died, things in Israel became unstable and unclear. While the people were sad about losing and not having a clear leader, David was in Ziklag, which was Philistine land, where he had hidden after years of being persecuted. I felt pain and had to wait, but I also felt quiet loyalty. He could have claimed the throne when the enemy fell, but he waited for the Lord to tell him what to do. Someone from the Amalekite tribe told him that Saul and his sons had died. David did not express joy when he learned about what had happened on the battlefield. He was instead filled with deep sadness. He was sad about more than just the king. He was also sad about Jonathan, the friend who had become like a brother to him. It wasn't just politics that bound them. It was faith, trust, and family love that made it strong. David wrote an elegy called the Song of the Bow to show how sad he was. It is found in 2 Samuel 1:19-27. In that song, he not only laments the death of the Great One, but he also praises Saul's bravery as a soldier for Israel. David won't put down the picture of the dead king, even though he has been persecuted many times in the past. He knows what his job is and gives him respect after the fact. This shows what a great person he was, a heart that can tell the difference between a person's mistake and the honor of the job he held. He wasn't pretending to be sad, it was real, coming from someone who knew how important it is to be a leader. It was clear to David that the throne was not a prize, but a duty. So even though he had the chance to ascend, he kept his feet on the ground and his eyes on heaven. He didn't move quickly. He did not push the matter. God had to open the way for him. The heads of the group started to move when there was a lot of sadness and unrest. The Philistines were an even bigger threat because there was no one in charge. David had been appointed by Samuel many years before, but he had not yet taken the throne legally. Then the first step was taken by his family, the tribe of Judah. The elders accepted him as king in Hebron, and that's where David's reign started, though it was only in the southern part of Israel. Once David was in Hebron, he started to strengthen his command. He made new relationships, organized his army, and dealt with people who were still linked to the house of Saul in a smart way. But the change of power was not smooth at all. One of Saul's living sons, Ishbosheth, was made king over the remaining tribes with the help of Abner, who was in charge of the old army. Israel was finally split up. There was a civil war in the country. David and the men of Judah were on one side. Ishbosheth and the northern groups were on the other side. There were random fights and rising tensions during the war, which made it harder for people to stick together. But David stood out for being smart even when there was war going on. He did not attack without thinking, and he did not do it to get back at them. Every move was based on knowledge and fear of God. At the same time, he kept winning battles. As a leader, David showed bravery and skill. Against the Philistines, he used strategic knowledge to win battles that raised the nation's spirits and gave people hope. His name became linked to justice and power. Israel's heart leaned more toward him with each victory. Even though David moved forward, Shimei still fought back, mostly with Abner's help. Saul's house tried hard to stay in charge, but things were unstable, and trust among friends was falling. Over time, it became clear that Israel's future would not lie in continuing Saul's lineage, but in a new circle based on faith, obedience, and rightful leadership. David still only ruled over southern Israel, but things were starting to change. With Shimei in charge and Abner's armed power behind them, the house of Saul continued to fight back. Even though they were weaker, this group was still a real threat to the kingdom's unity. The civil war had been going on for years and had hurt a lot of people. The groups were still split up. Ishbosheth wasn't a good boss by himself. Abner, who was in charge of Saul's old army, had a lot of power and made most of his choices. Abner was in charge of the background, made the big strategic choices, and made sure that the northern tribes stayed faithful. But as time went on, disagreements started to happen between Shimei and Abner. This showed that even among friends, things were getting worse. Gibeon was the site of one of the most important fights in this unstable time. Shimei's army, led by Abner, came up against David's men, led by Joab. A lot of people were hurt and killed in the fight. There, brothers fought with each other, and different groups of the same people killed each other. It seemed like there would never end the pain caused by domestic conflict. In the middle of the battle, Joab, who was David's leader and Asael's brother, spoke to Abner face to face. The brave and quick Asael tried to catch Abner, but was killed in the fight. This made Joab want to get even, and he would never forget that moment. Even though there were deaths and chaos, there was no clear winner in the fight. Abner withdrew because he knew the war was weakening the country. The story then took a turn that no one saw coming. Because Abner didn't like Ishbosheth, he started to think about bringing the country together under David's rule. He was sick of fighting and dividing people, so he made a deal. He would get the backing of the northern tribes in exchange for a seat in the new government. David, who was smart and had insight, agreed. He knew that repairing the relationship was important for keeping the peace. Getting together with Abner was a smart move, but it was also a dangerous one. The leader was a powerful man who knew how to run both the military and the government. The fact that he switched sides was a big step toward David's goal of becoming king of all Israel. However, Joab did not agree to this because he was determined to get even and was afraid of losing his important job. Joab made a cruel choice without talking to David first. Under the guise of getting revenge for Asael's death, he tricked Abner into a meeting and killed him. It was a hard blow that came out of nowhere. The Union efforts were put at risk by Abner's death, and David was furious. He was sad about the death of the man who had reached out to help bring peace and let everyone know that he had nothing to do with the crime. David wore clothes of grief and cried for Abner in public. He also didn't eat that day. This made Israel feel touched and strengthened his reputation as a fair leader who cared about keeping the country together. The fact that he didn't take sides when a friend did something wrong showed what kind of king he was becoming, one who put justice above political ties. Not long after that, 2 of Shobach's own cops killed him. They did not respect their king. Instead, they betrayed him because they thought it would make David happy. But David once again showed that he was honest. As soon as he learned of the crime, he had the rebels put to death and the murder was condemned. He didn't want to get to the throne through murder and betrayal. He wanted to do what God wanted. Now that Shimei was dead, the way was finally open. When the Israelites saw that God had called David, they went to Hebron and made him king of the whole country. It was the start of a new phase. David's first act was to make Jerusalem the capital of his kingdom. It was a neutral city that wasn't part of any group. It was also carefully placed and could represent how the people were all one. David took over the fortress of Zion and set up his rule there. When it was built, the city of David stood for fresh starts, unity, and hope. The fighter who had been tormented finally became king of a people who had been healed. David's government wasn't just based on war plans or political goals. His heart hurt for something more important, putting real prayer back at the center of people's lives. As soon as he brought the groups together and took over Jerusalem, he turned his attention to what was most important to him, making God present in the country. And for that, a holy object called the Ark of the Covenant had to be in the center of attention. There was a lot more to the Ark than just religion. It was kept outside the new city until then. It stood for the promise between God and Israel, the divine coming to earth, and had spiritual meaning for hundreds of years. David made it clear that his government would not be based only on buildings, but also on faith by planning to take it to Jerusalem. There was a walk between the chair and the altar, but when they tried to bring the ark for the first time, something terrible and unexpected happened. The horses pulling the ark stumbled while it was being moved, and Uzzah reached out to steady it. He died right then and there. David was scared. A time that should have been a time of joy turned into a time of sadness. It was clear from God's words that His holiness should not be taken lightly. It wasn't enough to have good goals. Respect and obedience were also needed. The king's heart learned a lesson from this loss. This man could really want to respect God, but there was a right way to do it. David was aware that there was no easy way for him to get close to God. The ark stayed in Obed-Edom's house for 3 months and brought good things there. During this break, there was also time to learn. David didn't make the same mistake on his second try. He did what the law said to do and told the Levites to take the ark on their shoulders, just like God had told Moses to do. Gifts, praise, and awe were brought to the parade. With each step, songs and happy faces were played. When the ark finally got to Jerusalem, everyone joined in the celebration. David danced in front of the ark because he was so happy he couldn't hold it in. He took off all of his royal clothes and put on a religious stole. He then let himself worship freely. There was more than just the king enjoying a political win. There was a man who loved God and praised the one who was really king of Israel. His dancing, which some people, especially his wife Michal, didn't like, showed how important faith was to his rule. At this point, the spiritual past of the country moved into a new phase. Jerusalem was not only the seat of government, but also the place where people went to pray. David set up tents, assigned bands and Levites to work in shifts, and made praise a daily habit. It wasn't a quiet or private church. It was living, strong, and open to everyone. David wanted to go even further because his heart felt even warmer. He planned to build the Lord a permanent temple. He didn't think it was right to live in a timber house with the ark in a tent. His goal was to build a permanent, grand place where God could always be praised. His wish was granted, but the Lord wouldn't let him because he was a warrior. But the promise from God was even better. His son would build the temple, and David's family would live on forever. David showed who he was by honoring God, even when it meant giving up things he wanted. In contrast to Saul, who wanted to please everyone and didn't want to face his mistakes, David knew how to be humble, say sorry, and start over. He really wanted to find God even when he failed. He was called a man after God's own heart because of this. Israel was stable, won battles, and grew while he was in charge. David's rule became a model for all who came after him. More than that, it led to something bigger. A king who would come from his children and grandchildren and build a country that would last forever. David's story, on the other hand, makes us think about what kind of leadership God likes. Power and influence are not enough to keep a throne in place. The presence of God gives power its legitimacy. This is what David knew from the start. Everything falls apart without God at the center. The story of Saul and David is not just a memory from a long time ago. It is still read today because it talks about faith, decisions, and what happens when the heart turns away from God. Behind the kings, wars, and prophets, this story shows something very important that is still true today. The difference between people who try to solve their own problems and people who give up and do what God wants, even if they don't understand why. Saul was the first king of Israel. He started out with hope, but became ruled by fear and hurry. When God spoke to him in silence, he didn't wait. He ran to find answers in places the Lord told him not to. Right there is where his downfall started. The story of his life shows us what happens when faith turns to hopelessness and people try to find safety in things other than God. Things from the past happen again today in different ways. People who are restless are always looking for quick ways to make their lives easier. Many people don't believe in God and instead look to the occult, false promises, and ways that seem to help but end in nothingness. Today's world has taken the same old mistake and given it new names like myths, predictions, and spiritual practices that separate us instead of uniting us. All of this comes from one thing: being afraid to wait. God hasn't changed, though. He won't find hope in the dark. He'll find it in giving up. When Paul wrote to the Philippians, he said, Do not worry about anything. Instead, bring your requests to God through prayer, petition, and thanksgiving in every situation. He wasn't just talking about ideas when he said, "And the peace of God, which goes beyond all understanding, will keep your hearts and minds." Philippians 4:6-7. This peace doesn't mean that there are no troubles. Those who accept God are kept alive by His presence. Saul lost this presence because he never learned how to stay in it. His defiance made him feel hopeless all the time. He broke the promise, didn't listen to God's words, and became a slave to the decisions he made. His sad death is a stark warning that going against our faith always costs more than we think. Without spending time with God, life is like a battlefield where many fights are lost. David, on the other hand, shows us another way. A man with flaws, but a heart ready to turn away from sin. He cried when he made a mistake. He came back after he fell. He didn't run away when God told him he was wrong. He broke down. In spite of his flaws, this is why people called him a man after God's own heart. He wasn't strong because he won battles, but because he always relied on God's presence. Saul wanted to be in charge, but David just wanted to be friends. Both were driven by fear, but one was kept going by faith. That's why David's rule became a sign of how faithful God was. Israel did well mentally while he was in charge. The city became the place where heaven and earth met when the ark was moved back to the center of prayer. Jerusalem, which grew out of David's desire to honor the Lord, became the center of faith. We are still on these two paths, Saul's and David's. At some point, everyone will have to pick between acting quickly and trusting, being proud and following the rules, and listening to the voices of the dark or God's silence. And it's in the quiet that true faith is shown. Sadness screams, faith is ready, and people who wait on the Lord never feel let down. This call to seek God not as a last option but as a first shelter is repeated over and over in the Bible. To pray is not to get answers, but to give up power. When you pray, you don't just say please over and over again. You let go of your fears and learn how to breathe under kindness. It shows us that God's will is safe, even when it takes us down roads we don't understand. Saul's fall shows us what not to do, and David's heart shows us the way. One shows how much it costs to disobey, and the other shows how powerful it is to return to God. Both also point to the same thing, the God who never leaves us, even when we turn away. There are people in every age who try to be strong like Saul did and get through hard times. Some people, like David, turn to the Lord even when they are hurt and are forgiven. The amount of mistakes they made is not what makes them different, but how they tried to change. This story doesn't end with death, it ends with hope. Due to a promise that would last forever, David's throne would become the home of the Messiah, the king who would rule forever. The one who would fix what sin had broken and give real peace to hearts that are restless. And that's where everything comes together. God is the same one who saw a shepherd and made him a king. He gives us all the same kindness today. No matter how badly we've done or how far we've gone, you can always get back. A road of trust, following rules, and giving up everything. Because God doesn't want perfect kings in the end. He wants hearts that are ready. If this story touched you, please leave a like, subscribe to our channel, and press the bell to keep getting content that increases your faith and gives you direction when things aren't clear. During the video, if anyone came to mind, please share it with them. It could be just what they need to hear today. Thanks for coming this far with us. May God's presence lead your life, just like it did for David, even on days when it seems like nothing is happening. Thank you for following us to the end of this incredible story. See you in the next video. May God be with you always. Amen.